To me, that's the big issue. Will politics dominate the decision making, or will economic good sense dominate? And that to me is the big issue. There are two processes going on. Obviously, there's the divorce process of Brexit, and then there's the negotiation for the future relationship. And of course, anyone with half a brain, in my opinion, should know those two processes should be happening together. How do you have the best possible separation if you've got no idea what your future relationship is going to be like? And it saddens me a bit that the EU said, no, we've got to negotiate the exit first before we can talk about the future. To me, that's a little bit of a shame. But obviously the major divorce issue seems to be this issue around how much money the UK is going to have to pay the EU, and that ought to be possible to sort that out. I'm hopeful at least it'll be possible to get to some reasonable agreement about the divorce process, and I hear talk now of hope that it might be achieved by October this year. Let's hope that's possible so they can get on with the future relationship issue, because to me that's the far bigger issue. And to me, it is absolutely in the best interests of the UK, in the best interests of the EU, and in the best interests of the world, including New Zealand, very much in our best interests, for the UK and the EU to negotiate the best free trade agreement the world has yet seen. Now, Martin will say, Lockwood, that's a wonderful aspiration to have, but politically it's not possible. And I fear Martin's right, that it's politically not possible, but I keep arguing the case for it. I still do a lot of speeches up in the UK. I keep arguing the case for it because the world needs it. And I'll go into why the world needs it. The reason why people say it's not possible is, how could you allow, this is what people say, how could you allow Britain or the UK to leave the EU and have just as good access to the single market as if they were members of the EU? How could you allow that? That can't be possible. You've got to punish the UK, or at least if you're not punishing them, you've got to make it very clear that if you want access to our great market, you've got to comply with all the rules that we make here in Brussels. And to me, my worry is that political thinking will dominate a sensible economic outcome. That's why I mentioned right at the outset when I started talking to you today how I had not appreciated the extent to which the EU is a political project. And because of that fact that it's so much a political project, I worry that those political considerations will dominate a sensible economic outcome. Because the most sensible economic outcome is to say, okay, we accept that you don't like being part of the EU, but you're a hugely important part of the global economy. The UK is still the 5th biggest economy in the world. We need you doing well on our doorstep. We therefore want to have an absolutely open free trade agreement. Okay, you're going to do things a bit differently from us, but let's enter into mutual recognition arrangements whereby we recognize your regulation as being the equivalent of ours. That's what we do with Australia. We have a Trans-Tasman mutual recognition agreement with Australia. Canberra doesn't regulate for New Zealand. Wellington doesn't regulate for Australia. We recognise each other's regulations as being equivalent. And therefore what can be sold legally in New Zealand, by and large, can be sold legally in Australia. And there's no reason why the UK and the EU couldn't enter into those kind of arrangements. They start from a common point. They start from a common regulatory basis at the moment. Why not recognise that there are areas of similar economic standing? The UK is at least higher standard of living as any part of Europe. And so why not have that kind of future relationship? But that would require economic sense to dominate political considerations, and it worries me that it might not happen. The flaw, of course, in that political thinking is, if you look at the great aspiration of the EU political project, it is peace and security. To me, peace and security is better achieved through deep economic integration than political integration. having been a politician, to me, politicians are too fickle to put all your faith in political systems. I'd put more faith in deep economic integration. That's why I argue that the deepest economic integration between the UK and the EU will produce the best outcome in the long term. So, okay, if we look, I don't want to talk too long, I just want to give you plenty of time for questions. Let me just say this before I leave the future negotiation bit. To me, what's interesting is Ireland, because I was heavily involved with Ireland. Ireland posed a real challenge in all of this because no one wants to reinstate the old border across between the Republic and Northern Ireland. Because I was High Commissioner to Northern Ireland and, of course, Ambassador to the Republic of Ireland. And no one wants to see that border re-established, least of all the EU. The EU's put a lot of effort and a lot of resource. The EU does a lot of good work globally, and it put a lot of resource into the International Fund for Ireland, trying to help overcome the deep divide caused by the troubles there in Northern Ireland. And so the EU's not going to want to see Ireland damaged by this process. A solution for the future that works for Ireland would work for the whole Brexit process. I think Ireland could be the microcosm of the solution to this whole thing, because they need an absolute open market relationship in Ireland there, because the UK is such a major trading partner for Ireland. If a stupid economic outcome is the result of this negotiation, Ireland will suffer just as much as the UK, maybe even more, because it's a smaller economy. So to me, Ireland is a fascinating one. Now, for the UK, looking to the future, Brexit offers a unique economic opportunity that I've alluded to before. Trade is the lifeblood of economic prosperity. And being part of the customs union, as I've said before, has been, in my view, economically limiting for the UK. It now has the opportunity to take a whole new approach with the dynamic parts of the world, like the Asia Pacific. But the interesting thing is, if it's able to do that, the UK faces the challenges of significant unilateral economic reform itself. And this is where they find New Zealand fascinating, because the situation the UK is in is not unlike the position we were in 1973 when Britain joined the EEC back in 1973. And the situation the UK faces right now is quite similar. What we learned from the process of making our way in the world, once our growth could no longer be through exporting more to Europe, the way we found our way in the world is highly relevant to the UK today. And it's interesting that the UK has recently employed one of New Zealand's former top global trade experts. And I remain involved with an outfit in London called the Gardner Institute as one of their trade advisors that is heavily involved with advising the UK government. And they're interested in New Zealand. I'll tell you why, because that process we went through after Britain joined the EEC was very challenging for us. We made some real dumb decisions. We thought you could make progress through protecting your economy. So we protected our wine industry. And of course, it ended up in tatters. It was protected by a 40% tariff. And we damn near destroyed it. In 1984, we had a wine lake. Couldn't export the stuff. No self-respecting person would drink it. We wiped that protectionism, and 30 years later, wine is our second biggest export to the EU, and we command the highest average price of any country in the world on the wine market in the UK.